All right, what's going on, everybody? Today's a special day because the training wheels are finally off. Trevor's letting me do the intro, so I am Zach, this is Trevor, and we are Reforging Fiction. So today is a little bit of a special episode. Rather than taking a previous piece of film or TV show material, we are going to be going back to what was really the roots of Reforging Fiction. About a year ago, Trevor and I were talking about how to fix the Star Wars franchise since it changed hands into the Walt Disney Company. It's been pretty hit or miss, and mostly miss if we're being honest. And they have made some thematic and narrative decisions that Trevor and I haven't exactly agreed with, particularly surrounding and jumping off from The Last Jedi. It's kind of taken a nosedive. There have been some ups, there have been a lot of downs. And so we began talking about how to fix the franchise. If Lucasfilm was handed to us and they gave us the mission of regaining the trust of the fan base and reigniting some excitement into Star Wars while also not taking away anything that has already been put out, what would we do? And now Trevor came up with a really, really good idea. I had an idea of how I would regain the trust of the fan base, and I think we're going to talk about that in another episode. But for today, we're going to go over what Trevor was able to come up with to retie the whole franchise together and to make it coherent and exciting once again. So, Trev, with that backdrop, why don't you take us through where you're going to begin?
All right. Well, I am goodness. I don't even know how to start because it's such a huge topic. But when Zach and I were talking about this, like he said, he had a completely different idea of what he thought he wanted to do. But when I was thinking about it, I wanted to start with, you know, the very first. Gosh, it was about when the Acolyte came out, right? And neither of us watched it really. We kind of read some reviews. I don't know. Did you watch any of it, Zach?
I didn't. I didn't watch a single one,
I uh
unfortunately.
I watched some, reviews and things and couldn't bear the pain of not having it be what I wanted it to be, I guess.
Right. Right.
So anyway, that's our justification for why neither of us watched that. But I was trying to think, how could you take everything that they had done, starting from the Acolyte and even the High Republic books or whatever, and all the way to the end of the Rise of Skywalker, and bring it all together without deleting anything, without you know, retconning things, doing any of that.
So
And
I
so
guess you could say it's like an anti-retcon.
yeah, yeah.
It's a making sense of everything without retconning anything.
Yes, that was the entire point. It was how can we take what has already been done? We don't want to retcon or get rid of any of it. We want to make it make sense somehow. And so really to begin with, I decided and to be honest, I'm drawing heavily from Legends books, the Rule of
Which
Two series.
it
That's
isn't a
not a bad
bad
thing.
thing.
It's not a
The
bad thing. I
one of the things I have a problem with is Disney getting rid of all the legends, I guess creating the legends material,
Yeah.
because some of it was excellent. And, they end up incorporating some of it back into their stuff anyway because it's so good. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry to cut you off.
No. Cut me off. Talk to me. But so I'm gonna read my notes. This was a year ago, and I wrote this
Right.
stuff down, and then I got lost and then we got back to it. Okay, so my first thought is you need a series to make it make sense. It's kind of like The Mandalorian, like um, gosh, like a lot of everything that has been done.
So a
Um,
streaming series.
we need a streaming series to cover it all.
Okay.
One movie per, it'll make sense in a minute. But like one movie is just not enough to encapsulate everything. And so I kind of want to break it down into three different series of or seasons of a new series.
Okay.
For all of you out there who are fans of Legends and know where I'm going with this, but I want to call it the rule of two. Rule of two.
Now,
And
this is very important, and Jack Black has discussed this in um the I guess the commentary in School of Rock, the School of Rock. Now we talk about whether the should be in the title. Is it rule of two or the rule of two? This is a very important distinction because Jaws is just Jaws. The School of Rock is the School of Rock, not School of Rock. So this is a very important point that I think we need to detail.
all right,
Is
listen,
it is it the rule of two or just rule of two?
to your point, it is the rule of two.
Very good. Very good.
It is the only way to make sense because it's not referring to anything other than a specific Sith doctrine that Darth Bane, if you've read the books, has come up with. And Yoda has mentioned it, in Phantom Menace, always too there are a master and an apprentice,
No more, no less.
no more, no less. And that's what we need. We need a root of all evil. If you are going to somehow have, you know, the clones of Palpatine are organized, and some of the stuff that gets done in the very end, but you've got to tie it to Phantom Menace and the Empire, Palpatine and his whole rule and everything, and make it all make sense. Then I feel like you have to start all the way back with Darth Bane establishing the rule of two. And your entire first season is how, once again, relying heavily on the books, but I don't think that is a bad thing. Um, Gosh, who is the author? Is it Drew Karpyshyn?
You know what? I can't remember who it is.
I feel like I should know this, but whoever it is, and I will look it up later. But whoever wrote that series wrote a brilliant series, and I get lost with some of the authors, but it was one of them. But the entire first season needs to be about Darth Bane destroying the Sith. For a recap, if you haven't read the books, um, Bane, there's the war, the never-ending war between the Jedi and the Sith, and there are a whole bunch of Dark Lords and a whole bunch of Jedi, of course. But they get to a point where Darth Bane realizes that the Sith can't win an all-out battle against the Jedi because by nature of the dark side, each Dark Lord, like, they can't cooperate like the Jedi can. There needs to be that power. There will always be a power struggle. There will always be infighting.
There will never be unity.
Ruthlessness. There will never be true unity. And at the time in the book, they had what was called the Brotherhood of Darkness, right? And one of the Jedi decided that one of the Jedi, one of the Sith, decided they were all going to be equal. Everyone is equal in the Brotherhood of Darkness, and da 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 da. And Darth Bane realized that was false, and it was never going to be true. And as long as they tried to defeat the Jedi on those terms, they they were going to fail. The Sith were going to lose. So he was looking at the situation, and every other Sith seemed to be buying into this, this lie, this untruth. Um, and he decided they all needed to be wiped out. And so he he found a ritual and tricked and manipulated the Sith Lords into uh, enacting this ritual that really took out every single Sith Lord except for Darth Bane. And I mean, baller bad A move, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so then he gets rid of the Sith, and he is the only Dark Lord of the Sith. And he came up with the rule of two philosophy, which is one master, one apprentice, one who embodies the power, one who craves it. And the entire setup is to keep the Sith moving forward and always getting stronger rather than maybe two or three Sith, you know, killing the stronger one so that they can have the power, but that weakens the Sith.
Well, and then the
So,
other thing is that, a Sith Lord who, is cooperating with another is not going to share everything that he knows. And so the knowledge
right,
base begins to fizzle out, right?
right, right,
So
right,
that's part of his philosophy is to keep everything concentrated into one person.
right.
And so that's sort of the idea. And it's almost like he wants his apprentice to kill him. It's like
Yes,
that's when he knows he's succeeded, is when his apprentice has killed him, type thing,
ab
which
absolutely.
is it takes dedication to get to that point. But anyway, just
It
to
does.
to throw that in there.
And so exactly to your point, that's the entire rule of two. It is he is constantly studying and learning and growing, and he is teaching his apprentice the exact same things. He's trying to build them up and build the strongest Sith apprentice that he can, knowing that eventually that Sith apprentice is going to challenge him for the right to be the master.
Right.
And there's only one way that ends. It's in the death of one of those two people.
Yep.
And so that is the rule of two doctrine in a very brief nutshell. But the entire first season of it needs to be, in order to fix everything, you need to establish the rule of two and the Sith grand plan, which is no longer are they going to fight on a, one-to-one grand scale with the Jedi. They are going to fight from the shadows. They are going to manipulate the galaxy. They are going to infiltrate the Senate, the leadership. They're going to spread out their influence across the galaxy to become this, for lack of a better word, an insidious force behind everything, right?
Right. Right.
So that's what he enables. And I feel like the very first season of this is Darth Bane they're fighting this war. He needs to get rid of the Sith and make the Jedi think that they have won.
Right.
So that is season one. However long that takes, whether that's 8 or 10 or 12 episodes or whatever, like we write that until it's done.
Right.
Whether that's 3 hours or 30 hours, we're going to write an amazing first season and get that done. And by the end of it, the Sith have been extinct. The Jedi think the Sith are extinct. And Darth Bane is the only Sith Lord left.
Okay.
Season
And
two,
that's
then,
you
yep,
would just go from So from Bane being nothing all the way up until destroying the Sith and
Yes.
fooling the Jedi into thinking they've been extinct. So the end of that pseudo war. That's
Yes.
season one.
Yes. Season one is that.
Okay. So season two, what are we looking at?
Okay. Season two then becomes Darth Bane training Xana. Well, or someone, let me look at my
Whoever.
notes, but he has to have an apprentice. And so then you start off with um you start off with Darth Bane, Darth Sana, whoever, but the next thing is season two is going to be a history of the Sith line, the Bane line, from Bane down to Plagueis.
Okay.
And to be
So,
clear, I don't care about the names necessarily. I am not saying, okay, in Legends it was Darth Bane and then Darth Cogn or Darth Xana and then Darth Cognis and then so on and so forth, all the way down to Darth Tenebris, Plagueis, and Sidious. I don't care about that, even though those are the ones that I can remember from the book series.
mhm.
That doesn't necessarily matter as much to me as the outline. You have to start with Bane. You could pick whoever you want to be his apprentice. We're concerned about writing a good storyline, not necessarily following everything about the books in particular from point A to point B.
Right. Okay.
But season two is like a history of the Bane line and how each one for 1,000 years moved the Sith plan forward.
Okay.
And it will be a little different of a series because there's just so much history to go through to
Hmm.
get down from point A to point B that like you can't spend too much time on each Sith Lord.
Okay.
So
So how many episodes per Sith Lord, per generation, per master?
I am thinking this is where I get lost because you could take as much time or as little time as you wanted to do this, right?
Right.
Um, and this is where I would need some help and input from you, but like how many Sith Lords have there been since Darth Bane all the way down to Palpatine?
It depends on what you expect their life expectancy to be. And
Right.
that also factors into how many apprentices do they try to take before they find the right one that can finally
Right.
overtake them, you know? So if you're saying, okay, well, an average of 80 years per Sith Lord, or let's say they are the Sith Lord for 30 years, I mean, you'd need, what would it be? A
30.
ton.
You need a lot.
30. What's so 1,000 divided by 30 years? It's like 30, 33-ish, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So 33 masters, give or take, you
Right.
know?
It's almost too much to cover, right?
It is.
So then you have to pick and choose who to focus on. And maybe you do a couple episodes on one or the other, but this is how you have to frame it though. History of the Bane line, but you have to have Darth Sidious being, Palpatine being the apprentice. That's season two is Palpatine is the apprentice and his master is teaching him lessons about the Sith.
Okay, okay. So you have Palpatine is the apprentice, Plagueis is the master, and you see these, so almost like a flashback type thing.
Yeah.
So each episode is a lesson that Palpatine is learning, and the flashbacks serve as, where did this come from? And so you get the history of
Yes.
it and you see where this Sith Lord went wrong or where this technique was learned, all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
it's centered around Palpatine and Plagueis.
Yes.
Now that's an idea.
See, and a year ago when I started this, I did not think that we should have done that, or I hadn't thought that through. But like that should be the basis for this entire series.
Absolutely.
And so like season one is Plagueis telling Palpatine about Darth Bane, explaining all of that, explaining the lessons that he learned, all of that, all while he's training Palpatine. And then
Right.
Palpatine is getting, you know, more involved in galactic politics and being, in the
Hmm.
political side of Naboo and sneaking away for Sith lessons and all of these things. So you have these intriguing little things that keep coming up over the course of the training, and it's all centered around what he's learning. And then even, to add more fun to it, you've got a plot line of Palpatine in season two trying to integrate into galactic politics,
Hmm.
keep himself from being discovered by the Jedi, being, revealed as a Sith. Um, but also like he'll learn something and then he implements that kind of knowledge
Right.
into what he is doing in the present day. And so you have this back and forth kind of thing in season two. And then you can extend this as long as you want.
Right.
Um, as much as it takes to not retcon, but to make sense of the world that Disney has set up with all of their, like the Mandalorian, the Acolyte, Andor, all of this stuff. We go in and we make sure that we're tying everything up with this series that we are creating, going back and forth between the rule of two and Palpatine and Plagueis learning what they or not learning, implementing what he is teaching Palpatine today. And we can set any number of plans in motion. We can, you know what I mean?
Right.
Um, so that is the second season and possibly the third, depending on how far we want to take this
Okay.
of the series. So you said,
Let me before we keep going, I
yeah,
have a really interesting thought.
okay,
To end the first season and to sort of, give it the push into season two, because you're going from Darth Bane 1,000 years ago to Palpatine.
mhm,
I think something interesting is that Darth Bane should have a force vision slash prophecy where he sees Palpatine, like becoming the culmination of these things. Small
yeah,
thing, but something to make it flow so that it's not just, well, what happened to Darth Bane and now, does that kind of make sense?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I am all on board for that. Like, what makes him not special, but kind of,
Exactly.
um, kind of like the Anakin effect, but the
Yeah,
opposite.
exactly.
So I feel like that's number two. Season two is kind of a history, but it's maybe like 70-30 history of the Sith and lessons that we learn, and maybe 30% Palpatine in present day.
Okay.
Maybe I'm making those numbers up. It can swap, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But then in season three, you really need to get into what Palpatine and Plagueis are doing from, you know, he's training, and then he actually becomes a political figure, Palpatine. Not necessarily Senator Palpatine, but he's either an ambassador or something, right?
Right.
Whatever he ends up being, um, some sort of figure, whether that's just on Naboo or he's doing traveling around. But you need to start focusing on what they actually did from when he enters politics all the way to, at least the Phantom Menace, if not
Right.
farther.
Right.
And this is where we can get into, you know, actually starting to make sense of things that happened, like
Okay.
the Acolyte. And, you know, if I'm remembering, and I haven't watched it, so I can't remember, but according to my notes, we had like three things we needed to fix, or more. But you needed to like there was that whole thing with the witches,
Hmm.
and you need to have the um you need to have them being manipulated by Palpatine and Plagueis
Okay.
from the background. The witches don't know, but like somehow Palpatine and Plagueis are doing that, right?
Right.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Yeah. Um, but like we go to the storyboard and we actually have an idea of how they were manipulating these different groups, or the
Right.
Sith, who are really just dark Jedi that are being manipulated from the shadows, not the
Right.
true Sith. They are just Sith,
Hmm.
Um, and you can have this kind of, be told, and I toyed around with a movie or a series or whatever, but it really doesn't matter. But like that's when you start introducing new Jedi not new Jedi, but like familiar characters from episode one, and before. Like you could have Count Dooku being trained somewhere in there a little bit, or I don't know. It doesn't even matter, but like you've got Jedi, you've got the Sith,
Right.
and you kind of see them both interacting and trying to, for lack of a better word, manipulate the Republic and the galaxy,
Right.
you know. Um, but like then you can fix the and I say fix. I haven't watched The Acolyte, so I can't be like, yeah, this was horrible. But that was the consensus from people who were not,
Right.
you know, nothing.
From
Yeah.
from diehard fans, the
From diehard
consensus was that
fans,
it was not good.
yes. So we can try and fix that starting there and then move through the series
Okay.
based on this rule of two outline. And you've got familiar characters, you've got different people, and you can take this as far as you want, right?
Hmm.
You can take this through all of the movies, through the rebellion, through uh, the seedling government of the New Republic, all the way to the First Order, and then you know what I mean. You can take this format and try and put everything in if you want, or you can just use that as a basis to skip all the way ahead. And the final season is flashbacks from after. Like, what am I trying to say, Zach? Um,
Well, you have to funnel it into
right,
where Palpatine gets his obsession with immortality,
right,
because that's a big disconnect from the philosophy of Darth Bane to where Palpatine is because he wants to live forever, at least according to,
right,
Disney's interpretation, right?
right,
He
right, right,
became obsessed with cloning himself and finding a way to make force sensitive clone work, all that kind of stuff. And so there needs to be that last season has to be his departure from the true Darth Bane rule of two philosophy.
Right. Okay, so here's where we funnel that in. Thanks for bringing me back to where I needed to go.
That's what I'm here for.
So in the book Plagueis, Darth Plagueis or whatever it's called, Plagueis finds Palpatine. Well, he kills his master. He finds Palpatine, trains Palpatine, and his intention is that he and Palpatine are going to live forever and rule the galaxy as equals because the rule of two has been brought to fruition. They are going to uh, take over. They are going to frame the Jedi, do all of this stuff. They finally got this Dark Lord of the Sith elected as Chancellor. So Palpatine is becoming Chancellor. And then in that moment, the night before inauguration or whatever, Palpatine in the book kills Plagueis. And in Plagueis's mind, like I guess he, in the book, he lets his guard down because they've won. And in the moment of victory, that's when Palpatine kills Plagueis. But like Plagueis was working on becoming immortal. Like that was his entire goal was to use the Force to save people from dying, save himself from dying. He didn't care about people. He wanted to save himself from dying, right?
Right.
So he is killed by his apprentice, but I think we use that as no, he was not killed by his apprentice. He faked his death after Palpatine tried to kill him. I feel like that's where we go. And then rather than teaching that, because he hadn't quite figured it out yet at that point,
Mhm.
he fades into the background as he's dead, pretending to be dead. And he goes on and figures that out. And then that's where Palpatine's obsession comes from, is this idea that he can be immortal. He's done everything he wants. He just needs to figure out how to keep himself alive forever.
So the departure from the Bane doctrine, as we're calling it,
Yes.
begins with Plagueis, not necessarily Palpatine.
Right.
Okay.
And so Plagueis, in his mind, he and Palpatine were going to rule forever. Palpatine was going to be the political side of things, and he was going to be like the Force side of things, I guess. But like then they were going to share their knowledge and their power together. They were going to be co-chancellors, you know. Palpatine and Plagueis were going to be co-chancellors together, ruling together forever. Because Plagueis was on the cusp of learning how to be immortal.
Hmm.
And they had finally, it seemed, accomplished all of their goals, but then they didn't. But then Palpatine tried to kill Plagueis. Um, and I think that's what we emphasize and change is that Plagueis was alive. He was attacked, he was almost killed, grievously injured, etc., but was able to mask his presence in the Force, project that he was dead on Palpatine's mind because he was still the master and
Hmm.
still had some things to teach him. And Palpatine or Plagueis just goes off into the background. He learns how to be immortal and keep himself alive and at least prolong his life. And and then he's still putting things into motion behind the scenes, but now it's, you know, Palpatine is doing his thing and is sure that he killed Plagueis and that he is now the master of the Sith. And then you have everything that happens after that. So he declares everything the Galactic Empire, he rules the Empire, Battle of Yavin, all of that. Um, and you have Plagueis watching behind the scenes, amassing resources, doing whatever. And this is where we'd have to like have little flashback episodes or something to tie into it so you can see what he was doing while
Hmm.
all of this was going on. But then you can also see like Plagueis has his financial hands all over the place. He is a Mune in the books, right? And
Hmm.
Munes are the like the banking clan, and they
Right.
control a lot of the finances of the galaxy. So he's got his, banking clan ties and whatever. And so he starts amassing resources. He can manipulate things. When Palpatine starts trying to clone himself, he's secretly acquiring businesses and doing things and kind of ingraining himself into that process without Palpatine knowing it. And so then when Palpatine goes down on
Exegol.
not quite. I was thinking when Palpatine goes down on the Death Star 2,
Right.
then um you can have Plagueis going and trying to retrieve the body, him, trying to clone it because he finds that he actually liked being free to do what he wanted and not necessarily be the face of everything. He wanted to be behind the scenes, focus on the force, keep himself alive, manipulate things or whatever. He found that he likes that better. And so he then starts the Palpatine cloning process. He creates Snoke and uses Snoke as a puppet kind of thing to push his plans forward. And um that's where like Snoke comes in with his, I was from the beginning kind of thing, because they're trying to implant memories into these clones and they're
Right.
failing. But like, you can kind of explain some of that away. And then finally, you have uh, the cloning facility on Exegol. You can see Plagueis finally getting everything done. And, you know, he's got a mostly functional, Palpatine with memories and everything. Um, and it explains how somehow Palpatine returned. It explains all of that because he's back there trying to resurrect his apprentice almost.
So he's doing it so that he can be the actual puppet master.
Yes.
So
So
he's like transcended the rule of two to
yes.
become the rule of the shadows.
Yes. And so he's trying to rebuild the Sith, the Empire, take over the galaxy kind of thing. And finally, it fails once more when Rey kills Rey and Ben kill Palpatine in the Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
And in that moment, he has this kind of like, I want to say like what you should have had after the second Death Star died. It was like, okay, we can't keep doing this because building a better Death Star or a bigger Death Star or another Death Star and that being the thing that everyone is going after, that's not going to work anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he spends all of this time trying to revive Palpatine. That doesn't work. And so then the final season is him going into conflict with the new Jedi, the new Republic kind of people, you know?
Okay.
So at the end of Rise of Skywalker, it's like the entire galaxy has been like, we're not gonna let the Sith come alive or whatever, you know, and they all go to Exegol and all of that happens or whatever. Um, but then he realizes that they got away from the core principle that allowed them to manipulate the galaxy, and that was being behind the scenes of everything, right?
In the shadows.
In the shadows. And and that's what he's trying to regain. So then the final season, he finds another apprentice, someone who can, you know, help him or whatever, and he tries to re-implement the rule of two. And then you have this subplot line where you've got like Rey and Poe and Finn, and you've got to get them involved because they're now the characters.
Right.
Um, but my idea was, okay, so Plagueis is now behind the clones, and it's a few years after everything. So Rey is, she is a Jedi, but then the first thing that they do is they try and cut her off from the Force. I don't know why I decided that would be a good idea a year ago, but I like the idea of Rey being cut off from the Force, and then she has to go on this journey to figure out what happened. And that's where you start to reveal the origins of Snoke, the Knights of Ren, the manipulation of Luke and Leia and Han, and all of these things that are happening from the background. It's not just chance,
It's all by design.
all by design. So you have this Dark Lord who is focusing on these key figures and driving wedges in between them. You know, he is using the Force to cloud Luke's judgment and clarity, and Luke doesn't even know he's being manipulated. And then you
Luke doesn't even
have
know he exists.
doesn't even know he exists. Exactly. And he's, in the Rise of Skywalker, Luke is trying to find Exegol because he knows something is wrong and he's trying to find out what is wrong. And
Right.
same thing, like a wedge is drawn or is he drives a wedge between Luke and Han and kind of manipulates them into going back to the only lives that they knew, you know?
Right.
Um, and then you have this journey with Rey trying to reconnect with the Force. Um, and then she finds her way back to the Force, ends up having a confrontation with the apprentice, who is kind of like an arrogant, of course, figure,
Of
kind of
course.
gloating, like, you didn't even know there was this dark Lord of the Sith from, 250 years ago. He's immortal. He trained Palpatine,
Hmm.
and then she kills this guy. And then the final half of the season or the next season or whatever is Rey and Finn and Poe trying to track down Plagueis. Plagueis trying to manipulate everything, and then ultimately Plagueis is killed because it has to end that way.
It has to end that way. Now, that is an epic way to make sense of the dumpster fire that Disney has created because it ties up everything that drives you crazy about it. You know, they I mean, we already talked about this. We went through the sequels, and that's really the root of all Disney's Star Wars sins is the sequel trilogy. And I'll even say The Last Jedi was where they began to make mistakes. But it buffers it all enough to make sense of it and to reignite the excitement of Star Wars to where You want to know what's going on. You don't know how it's going to end. You don't know how these characters are going to influence each other.
Right.
So honestly, it's epic. I mean, I was going to try and drill you down on like, okay, well, what about how Palpatine became, obsessed with cloning himself? But we talked about that. He knew that Plagueis was on the verge of immortality and he didn't know how to do it. So he started going at it himself. But in actuality, Plagueis was still influencing him. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's masterful. It
I
really
mean,
is.
I I get excited thinking about this because it takes all of the elements that you like about Star Wars and brings them back to the front, right?
Right.
And that's what we want to do. We're not looking into gender politics. We're not
No,
looking into any wokeness. We're not trying to make any political statement or anything. We're trying to tell a good story. A story that 99% of the world would like, and the 1% hasn't heard of Star Wars.
exactly.
So,
And it's about sticking to the lore and
mhm,
doing justice to the franchise.
right.
You
And
know,
and just finding something and telling a good story.
exactly.
I harp on this all the time, when we're talking about video games or movies or books or whatever, like I don't care. Like you can have a cool background, you can have a cool world that you're in, but it's not about the world, it's about the characters and the story and the journey they go on. Um,
Exactly.
we talked about this when we talked about Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
magic of Pirates of the Caribbean was the characters and the core of who they were, and you can be a pirate and still be a good man, and you can, all of this stuff. But they looked at Jack Sparrow and said, "Oh, we've got this quirky, weird pirate guy. That's what people like." And it was,
Let's
and
amp it
then,
up.
yeah, and they exaggerated the wrong things.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to undo here. Star Wars is not about, you know, yeah, throw the lightsaber away, Luke. Let's subvert expectations. Well, if you're writing a good enough story, you
You
don't
don't
have the expectations. You
you
don't
don't
know what's going to
exactly.
come. It's it's like, hey, let's write A New Hope again. And then of course, to give Ryan Johnson a little tiny bit of credit, he's like, okay, well, we've already had The Empire Strikes Back.
And I have to assume, giving him as much credit as I possibly can, I have to assume that was what was going through his mind was, well, we just did A New Hope for the second time.
Yeah,
This is the third iteration of Death Star. We have to do something different. We have to take it in a different direction.
right.
So I will give him the benefit of the doubt as far as that goes. But he went about it the wrong way because he destroyed the characters.
Yeah,
Now, we better be
absolutely.
careful because it's going to turn into another bashing session of The Last Jedi. So
So,
I let's rein it back in, Trev.
okay,
What
reining it
last
back
says
in.
do you have to say?
Okay, it's character and story driven, and taking all of the things that make Star Wars cool again, okay? You need epic lightsaber fights. You need new force powers and things that you didn't see coming. And we already know everything that happens all the way up to the Rise of Skywalker, right? We know where it ends there. So now we have to shore things up. And the only way that I can think to do that and make it all make sense is to go all the way before. 1,000 years before any of this happened. You go all the way there, figure it out. You have the Darth Lord, or the Sith origins, all of that. Concentrate it down into we're manipulating everyone to take over the galaxy, and you expand on that part of the story that we kind of felt was a little lacking and a
Right.
little boring in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. You don't see much of that manipulation. You don't see much of what's been going on. You don't get a sense of the urgency of the political situation. You don't see the separate worlds being manipulated. You don't see really any of that. So you don't get the full weight of what's going on with the galaxy. And then it's like, all right, we've got a war, but like you can use this to add all sorts of weight to it.
Right.
And and like to be honest, we all knew where the series was going, not the series, where the prequel series was going, because that was turning Anakin into Darth Vader. You
Exactly.
knew exactly what was going to happen. You just didn't know how, but you knew where it was going. And so, like, this is what we want. We want a little bit of mystery and whatever, and questions answered all the way up to the end of Rise of Skywalker. And then you have this, like, okay, we have a final boss battle. We have to win. And you know you're going to get there, but we don't know how. And we don't know any of the twists and turns that are going to happen. But the good guys have to win. And so we have to tell a very compelling story from that point onward to get the win.
Right.
So that was my plan. That is saving Star Wars, in my opinion.
In a nutshell.
So
And I mean, I really think it's an excellent way to take the series because it's based in actual Star Wars lore. It's interesting, it's exciting, and not only does it, give some backstory to what's happening, but it extends beyond it, and I think one of the biggest problems that Disney has is I would say 80% of the material that they have produced, besides the sequel trilogy, has been concentrated between the end of Revenge of the Sith and the end of, or the beginning of New Hope.
right.
There's a 19-year period, and I would say 80% of their material has been in there. You have the Clone Wars, you have the Bad Batch, which is great. You have Obi-Wan series, you have the Andor series, you have the Ahsoka series, which sure, it takes place after. So does the Mandalorian. But it's like that's still, I mean, we're talking 30 years, and this is supposed to be a galaxy long ago in a galaxy far, far away. There's 50,000 years that they could pull from, but
Uh-huh.
they don't. And so the fact that this spans before and goes all the way till after, I think is a real strength. And just to give a little bit of a plug for our next episode, my idea takes place back before those 50,000 years. It's the origin of the Jedi and the Sith. And if you're interested, check us out next week. That's what we'll be talking about.
Absolutely. So we're gonna wrap it up there, just like I think this would wrap up the Skywalker saga completely, and then we can explore the rest of the galaxy of Star Wars however we want. We can create whatever story, a blank slate, this amazing, like I said, amazing galaxy, amazing lore, amazing worlds. We can do whatever we want, and we're not shackled to the Skywalker saga,
Right.
and we can wrap it up in a way that makes it make sense, that it's awesome. So many things have happened. We can tie it all up, put a nice bow on it, and all be happy
And be done with it.
and be done with it.
Move
And then
on.
we can move on, and then you can take brilliant directors and give them their own section of time in the galaxy, and you can give Ryan Johnson his trilogy that he wants to do.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's
And
where he would have shined
that's where he
is
would have shined.
10,000 years ago or 10,000 years in the future. Let him do what he wants. But
Absolutely.
get away from the Skywalker saga. It's like you're beating it to death.
Uh-huh. And the more you do, if you don't have a plan to wrap it up, is just going to make it worse. Even if
Exactly.
you have a good series in there, it's like, okay, remember, and this is a rant, so I apologize, but remember when um Rogue One came out and we were so excited?
Oh yeah. Oh
Even if
yeah.
you have series that are like Rogue One, where it's like, this is amazing. You add so much depth to what happened. You're telling this story of how they got the plans, the development of the Death Star, all of it. And you didn't need a Jedi in there to make it
Right.
work. Um, you have all of that going, and then to see them make so many missteps after that, that even if you have something good, it only takes away from the series because it's like you could have been doing this from the beginning.
Exactly. It's disheartening. It makes you lose faith.
It
It's
does.
like you hit a home run, but now you've struck out 30 times in a row.
Absolutely.
It's like the home run doesn't matter anymore.
It's true.
Anyway,
So
rant
anyway,
over.
we're gonna quit beating this horse right now. But we want to know what you think. Did I solve Star Wars? Did I fix it? I want to know. I want to know your comments. I want to know if you agree, what would you change? What would you add? What would you take away? How can we tie it up in a bow that makes everything make sense? Drop a comment. Uh, Share this with your friends. We want to know. We want to solve Star Wars. Send this to Dave Filoni and all of the execs there. I am happy to sign on as the overall story creator for Star Wars. I
Brother,
humbly submit my resume as a schmuck on the internet for that position.
I would take that job for the signing bonus of a ketchup packet. That's
Right?
how badly I want it. Uh,
Anyway,
but let us know, people.
let us know
Drop a
how
comment, leave a like.
we'll be back next week. We'll talk more about things that we could do. And then we'll wrap up Star Wars and get on to other stuff. But really, this was the origin of Quill and Hammer, and we love talking about this stuff. So if you have another movie, another subject, another franchise you want us to look at, drop that in the comments as well, and we will do our best to get to it in between my super busy schedule and Zach. He's just in medical school. It doesn't matter.
No big deal.
Um, so we'll spend as much time as we need. And until next time, we'll be reforging fiction for you.
Take it easy, guys.
Peace.